Mr. Johnson, surely someone of your background can solve this simple equation? The professor's words dripped with condescension as he pointed at the board, unaware that the quiet black student he was trying to humiliate had just spotted something that would change everything. What happens when a prestigious math professor deliberately writes a wrong equation to expose what he assumes is an unqualified scholarship student? What he discovers next will leave you speechless. This is the story of 12-year-old Marcus Johnson and how one moment in a classroom exposed the dangerous assumptions we make about brilliance. Keep watching to witness an incredible transformation that starts with a single equation. Dear viewer, I humbly request you to watch or listen till the end and rate this story out of 10. Your rating will help me to give you better stories in next videos. If you are watching my story for the first time, subscribe this channel and press the bell icon now not to miss the notifications of my daily published new stories. Thank you, and let's dive into the full story. The September morning air felt heavy with possibility as Marcus Johnson stood before the towering gates of Pemberton Academy. His second-hand uniform, carefully pressed by his mother at 5 a.m. before her hospital shift, couldn't quite hide its worn edges. But Marcus didn't notice the uniform's imperfections. His mind was already calculating the architectural angles of the Victorian buildings, finding Fibonacci sequences in the ivy patterns crawling up the walls. "You belong here, baby," his mother had whispered that morning, pressing a wrapped sandwich into his backpack.
Don't let anyone tell you different.
Marcus clutched his scholarship letter like a lifeline. Full academic scholarship to the most prestigious prep school in the state, a dream that had seemed impossible just months ago when he'd been solving differential equations on the back of grocery receipts while his mother counted pennies for rent. The other students flowed past him like expensive cologne and privilege, their voices carrying words he'd only heard on TV.
Did you summer in the autumn?
Father's new yacht is divine. Which tutor prepared you for the entrance exam? Marcus had prepared himself, with library books and free online courses, solving problems by candlelight when the electricity got cut off, finding beauty in numbers when the world outside seemed chaotic. "Excuse me," a blond boy bumped into him, then looked him up and down.
Are you lost?
The public school is 3 blocks down. "I'm a student here," Marcus said quietly, showing his ID card.
The boy size weekend.
"Oh, you're one of those diversity students."
The warden in the air like en accusation.
Marcus had heard worse in his 12 years. He'd learned that numbers didn't care about your skin color or your mother's bank account. In mathematics, logic reigned supreme. 2 plus 2 equaled 4 whether you were calculating it in a mansion or a one-bedroom apartment with peeling paint. He found his locker, number 1847, a prime number, which felt like a good omen. As he organized his supplies, all purchased from the dollar store but functional nonetheless, he overheard whispers. "That's the scholarship kid. I heard they had to lower standards this year. My father says it's all political correctness." Marcus let the words wash over him like white noise. He'd learned to filter out distractions when solving complex problems, and people's prejudices were just another form of interference. His schedule showed advanced mathematics first period. Room 314, pi rounded to 2 decimal places. Another good sign. Marcus had been doing calculus since age 9, when he discovered his mother's old community college textbook and realized that the curves and symbols told stories more beautiful than any fairy tale. The hallways of Pemberton were adorned with portraits of distinguished alumni, judges, senators, CEOs. All white faces staring down at him with oil-painted eyes. Marcus wondered if his portrait would ever hang here, or if some dreams were reserved for certain postal codes. He paused outside room 314, peering through the small window. Students were already seated, chatting animatedly about summer math camps and private tutors. One boy was casually mentioning how his father, a Princeton professor, had been drilling him on differential equations since middle school. Marcus almost smiled. He'd learned differential equations from a YouTube channel, watching on a cracked phone screen, rewinding when the connection glitched, working problems on napkins during his mother's breaks at the diner where she used to work. The door felt heavier than it should as he pushed it open. 20 pairs of eyes turned toward him, conversation stopping mid-sentence. He was the only black face in a sea of privilege, as conspicuous as an error in an otherwise perfect equation. "Take a seat," someone muttered, not unkindly but not warmly either. Marcus chose a desk in the middle, not too far back to seem disengaged, not too far front to seem eager. He pulled out his notebook, the same one he'd used all last year, pages crinkled but full of careful calculations and theoretical proofs he worked on for fun. The classroom smelled of chalk dust and certainty, the kind of certainty that came from never having to question whether you belonged. Marcus breathed it in, letting it fill his lungs. He belonged here, not because of charity or quotas, but because numbers sang in his head like others heard music. As students continued to file in, Marcus opened his notebook to a fresh page and began sketching a proof he'd been working on, a new approach to the Collatz conjecture that had been dancing in his mind during the bus ride. His pencil moved with practiced precision, each symbol a note in a mathematical symphony only he could hear. He didn't notice the door open one final time, didn't see the tall figure with silver hair and piercing blue eyes survey the room with the authority of someone who'd never been questioned. Professor Richard Whitmore had arrived, and Marcus Johnson's real test was about to begin. Professor Richard Whitmore adjusted his Harvard tie in the faculty bathroom mirror, the same routine he'd followed for 37 years of teaching. The burgundy silk had been a gift from the dean after his third published paper on advanced number theory, and he wore it on first days as a reminder of standards that must be maintained. "Excellence is not negotiable," he muttered to his reflection, smoothing down silver hair that had once been the same dark brown as the leather-bound journals lining his office shelves. At 61, Whitmore had built a reputation as the gatekeeper of mathematical rigor at Pemberton Academy. His students went on to MIT, Princeton, Caltech, but only the ones who deserved it. The morning faculty meeting had soured his mood. Principal Hayes, with her progressive ideas and diversity initiatives, had announced the new scholarship program with such enthusiasm it made his teeth ache. "We need to open our doors wider," she'd said, beaming at the assembled teachers. "Brilliance exists everywhere, not just in traditional places." Whitmore had bitten his tongue, remembering his own journey from a middle-class background to mathematical prominence through sheer merit and proper preparation. No shortcuts.
No endoux.
No lowered bars. His Italian leather shoes clicked against marble floors as he made his way to room 314. 30 years in this room, 27 mathematics Olympiad champions, for Fields Medal recipients among his former students. The walls themselves seemed to whisper theorems and proofs, a sanctuary of logical purity in an increasingly chaotic world. He paused at the doorway, surveying his advanced mathematics class. The usual suspects were there: Timothy III, his grandson, looking confident in the front row, the Henderson twins with their matching calculators worth more than some people's cars, Sarah Chun, whose parents had hired a Cambridge professor for summer tutoring. And then he saw him. The only black face in the room, seated in the middle like a statistical outlier in an otherwise normal distribution. The boy was hunched over a notebook, pencil moving rapidly, completely absorbed. Whitmore's jaw tightened. So this was one of the diversity admits Hayes had been so proud of. He'd seen it before in his decades of teaching. Well-meaning administrators pushing unprepared students into advanced classes, setting them up for failure in the name of inclusion. The kindest thing really was to identify the problem early, redirect the student to an appropriate level, preserve the integrity of the advanced program.
Good morning, scholar. Whitmore's voice cut through the châtelaine à blade trubuté.
21 heads snapped to attention, except one. The Johnson boy, as the roster identified him, continued writing for a full 3 seconds before looking up, as if emerging from a trance.
Whitmore's eyes narrowed.
Lack of immediate response. First mark against him.
I am Professor Whitmore.
Some of you know me by reputation. For those who don't, let me be clear, this is advanced mathematics, not arithmetic appreciation. If you cannot differentiate between integration by parts and integration by substitution, you're in the wrong room. A few nervous chuckles. The Johnson boy merely tilted his head slightly, as if processing the distinction was beneath consideration. Whitmore felt his irritation spike. This year, we'll be covering topics typically reserved for college freshmen. Some of you, his gaze lingered pointedly on Marcus, may find the pace challenging. There's no shame in recognizing one's limitations early. He turned to the board, writing out the course outline with practiced strokes. Behind him, he could feel the room's energy, anticipation from his usual stars, anxiety from the marginal admits, and from the Johnson boy, nothing.
No nerveux énergie, no eager shuffling.
Unusual. Mr. Whitmore, Timothy raised his hand. Will we be preparing for the Olympiad again this year? Naturally. Though selection will be even more rigorous. Only the truly exceptional need apply. Again, his eyes found Marcus. Pemberton's reputation depends on sending our absolute best. As he distributed the syllabus, Whitmore's mind was already categorizing students. The Hendersons would excel at computational problems, but struggle with proofs. Sarah would master theory but needed pushing on applications. Timothy, well, nepotism aside, the boy had genuine talent, groomed from birth for mathematical greatness.
And Johnson?
Whitmore paused at the boy's desk, noting the worn edges of his notebook, the dollar store calculator, the careful preservation of every inch of paper. The boy met his gaze directly, not defiantly, but with a quiet steadiness that was somehow more unsettling.
Monsieur Johnson, y présumé.
Yes, sir.
Tell-me, what is your mathematical background?
Which prep courses have you completed? I've been self-studying, sir. Library books and online resources mainly. Several students exchanged glances. The Hendersons actually smirked. Whitmore felt his suspicions confirmed. Self-study. Code for unprepared. I see. And your previous school? Martin Luther King Elementary, sir.
Public school. The smirks grew wider.
Whitmore nodded slowly, filing this information away. A public school student thrown into advanced mathematics at Pemberton. Hayes had truly outdone herself this time. Well, Mr. Johnson, I hope your self-study has prepared you adequately. Mathematics at this level requires more than enthusiasm. He moved on before the boy could respond, but something nagged at him. The notebook he'd glimpsed, the writing had been small, precise, but what he'd seen looked almost like. No.
Impossible.
Public school students didn't independently work on Collett's conjecture variations. The boy was probably just doodling, trying to look impressive. As he began his opening lecture on the beauty and rigor of pure mathematics, Whitmore's mind was already formulating a plan. A test, early and decisive, to demonstrate the folly of lowering standards. Something that would reveal true mathematical understanding versus superficial preparation. He thought of his own mentor, Professor Hartwell, who'd once told him, "Mathematics is the ultimate meritocracy, Richard. Numbers don't lie, and they don't care about good intentions." By the end of class, he'd have designed the perfect assessment. Something that would separate the wheat from the chaff, the prepared from the pretenders. And when young Mr. Johnson inevitably struggled, it would be a teachable moment for everyone, including Principal Hayes. The boy needed to learn that Pemberton Academy wasn't a charity, and mathematics wasn't a democracy. Some people simply weren't meant for the rarefied air of advanced mathematics, and the kindest thing was to help them realize it early. Whitmore smiled to himself as he wrote the first equation on the board. By week's end, the Johnson situation would resolve itself, and his advanced class would return to its proper composition, students who belonged there by merit, not misguided social engineering. He had no idea how wrong he was about to be proven. Wednesday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that made Pemberton Academy's Gothic towers look particularly imposing. Professor Whitmore stood at his classroom board, chalk in hand, crafting his trap with the precision of a mathematician and the cunning of a chess master. The equation flowed from his fingers onto the board, a differential equation complex enough to challenge college students, with one subtle deliberate error embedded in the third line. He'd changed a positive to a negative sign, a modification that would cascade through the solution, making it impossible to solve correctly without first identifying the mistake. It was perfect. Any student who'd been properly prepared, through legitimate tutoring and systematic study, would recognize the standard form and spot the anomaly. But someone who'd merely memorized procedures or relied on self-study would blindly follow the incorrect path. The students filed in, Timothy greeting him with confident familiarity, the Henderson twins comparing notes from their private tutor, Sarah Chun already reviewing yesterday's problems. And then Marcus Johnson, walking with that same quiet determination, taking his middle seat without fanfare. Whitmore noticed the boy's notebook was already open, covered in neat rows of calculations. From his vantage point, he could make out what looked like, was that a novel approach to Riemann sums? He shook his head.
Impossible.
The boy was probably just copying problems from some website. "Good morning, scholars," Whitmore began, his voice carrying the authority of decades. "Today, we'll review material you should all be familiar with from your preparatory work." He gestured to the equation on the board. This is a standard second-order linear differential equation with variable coefficients. Who can walk us through the solution? Timothy's hand shot up, eager as always. The Hendersons looked confident. Sarah was already working through it in her notebook. But Whitmore's attention was fixed on Marcus, who stared at the board with an intensity that seemed to penetrate the chalk itself. The boy's eyes moved through the equation line by line, and then there.
Whitmore sawit.
The slightest furrowing of brow at the third line, a pause in the rhythmic tracking of his pupils. He'd noticed something. Anyone? Whitmore prompted, ignoring Timothy's increasingly frantic hand-waving. Surely this is elementary for students of your caliber. I can solve it, Professor, Bradley Henderson offered, already standing.
In un moment, Monsieur Henderson.
I'm curious about our newer students' preparation. Whitmore's gaze fixed on Marcus with laser precision. Mr. Johnson, surely you can solve this? After all, your self-study must have covered differential equations.
The room grew silent.
20 pairs of eyes turned toward Marcus, some sympathetic, most anticipating entertainment. The scholarship kid being put on the spot, better than morning coffee for the Pemberton elite. Marcus remained seated for a moment, his fingers absently tapping against his notebook, not nervously, but as if working through calculations in the air. Professor Whitmore, he began, his voice steady but careful, I notice there's an issue with the equation as written.
Harry plof whisper.
Timothy actually laughed. He can't even read it properly, someone muttered.
Whitmore felt a surge of satisfaction.
The boy was trying to deflect, to avoid admitting he couldn't solve it. An issue, Mr. Johnson? This is a textbook example. Perhaps your online resources weren't as comprehensive as you believed. Marcus stood slowly, his second-hand uniform hanging a bit loose on his slim frame. May I approach the board, sir? By all means. Whitmore stepped aside with exaggerated courtesy. Please enlighten us about this issue. As Marcus walked to the front, Jason Miller stage whispered, this should be good. Kid probably thinks differential means subtraction. But something in Marcus's bearing made Whitmore's confidence waver slightly. The boy moved with purpose, not the shuffling reluctance of someone about to be exposed. He picked up the chalk with familiar ease, as if he'd held 1,000 pieces before. The equation as written, Marcus said, his voice gaining strength, has a sign error in the third line. You've written negative xy when the standard form requires positive xy for this type of equation. The room fell absolutely silent. Whitmore felt his face begin to warm. The boy had not only spotted the error but identified it precisely. Furthermore, Marcus continued, turning to face the class with quiet confidence, if we were to proceed with the equation as written, we'd get a divergent series in the solution that would violate the boundary conditions implied by the coefficient structure. Timothy's hand slowly lowered.
The Hendersons exchanged un certain glance.
Sarah Chun was rapidly checking her work, her face showing growing amazement.
Whitmore's mind raced.
This was impossible. No public school student, no matter how talented, should be able to spot that error so quickly, much less understand the mathematical implications. You're suggesting I made an error? With respect, sir, yes. Marcus turned back to the board. Would you like me to show the correct solution?
The challenge in the air.
Whitmore felt the eyes of his students upon him, felt his carefully constructed test crumbling. He had two choices, admit the error and reveal his deliberate trap, or double down and risk his credibility. You're mistaken, Mr. Johnson, he heard himself say, the words coming out harder than intended. This is precisely the form used in advanced applications. Perhaps your self-study hasn't exposed you to variations beyond the basic textbook forms. A few students nodded uncertainly, trusting their professor's authority over the scholarship kid's claim. But Marcus didn't back down. Instead, he did something that would haunt Whitmore for weeks to come. He smiled. Not smugly or disrespectfully, but with the pure joy of someone who lived for mathematical truth. Then perhaps, Professor, I could demonstrate why the negative sign creates an inconsistency. It might be instructive for the class. Whitmore felt trapped by his own device. To refuse would seem petty and defensive. To accept would mean watching this public school student dismantle his carefully crafted deception. Very well, he said, his voice tight. Show us your interpretation. Marcus began to write, his chalk strokes confident and precise. If we accept the negative sign, then when we apply the Frobenius method here. The mathematics flowed from his fingers like music, each step building logically on the last. Whitmore watched in growing disbelief as Marcus not only proved the error but began exploring the equation from angles that showed deep, intuitive understanding. This wasn't rote learning or memorized procedures. This was real mathematical thinking at a level that should have taken years of proper instruction to achieve. And so we see that the negative sign forces a contradiction in the 7th term of the series expansion, Marcus concluded, setting down the chalk. The equation as Professor Whitmore originally intended, with the positive sign, yields this elegant solution. He quickly sketched the correct solution, throwing in an alternative method using Laplace transforms almost as an afterthought. The board filled with mathematics that some college students would struggle to follow, yet flowed from this 12-year-old's mind like water from a spring. The classroom was tomb silent. Timothy stared at the board with his mouth slightly open. The Henderson twins looked lost. Sarah Chun was frantically copying everything down, her face alight with intellectual excitement. And Professor Whitmore stood frozen, his worldview tilting on its axis. Everything he'd assumed, every prejudice he'd harbored, every justification for his little test, all of it crumbled before the undeniable evidence on his blackboard. Marcus Johnson wasn't just competent. He wasn't just prepared. He was extraordinary. "Shall I continue with the solution, Professor?" Marcus asked quietly, the chalk still in his hand, "or would you prefer to correct the error first?" The chalk in Professor Whitmore's hand felt suddenly heavy as 21 pairs of eyes ping-ponged between him and the young black student who had just deconstructed his carefully laid trap. The silence in room 314 was so complete that the distant sound of a lawnmower outside seemed deafening. "You're mistaken, Mr. Johnson," Whitmore heard himself say, his voice carrying 37 years of unquestioned authority. "This formulation is used in advanced applications beyond the scope of elementary textbooks." Marcus stood at the board, chalk still in hand, and for a moment something flickered in his eyes, not doubt but disappointment. As if he'd expected better from a mathematician of Whitmore's reputation. "Professor," Marcus said carefully, "I understand there are various formulations, but this specific error makes the equation mathematically inconsistent. If you'd like, I can show." "What I'd like," Whitmore interrupted, his face flushing deeper, "is for students to trust that their instructor knows considerably more than they do about advanced mathematics." Timothy, ever eager to support his grandfather, chimed in, "Maybe you should sit down, Marcus. Professor Whitmore literally wrote the textbook on differential equations. The 3rd edition of Advanced Differential Equations in Applied Mathematics," Marcus said quietly. "I've read it. It's excellent. Which is why I'm confused about this error, since on page 247 of that very textbook, Professor Whitmore explicitly states that sign consistency in the coefficient matrix is crucial for convergence." The room seemed to tilt. Sarah Chun quickly pulled out her laptop, fingers flying across the keyboard. The Henderson twins exchanged glances that said they were completely lost but didn't want to admit it.
Whitmore's mind raced.
The boy had not only read his textbook but could quote specific pages from memory. His carefully constructed narrative about unprepared diversity admits was crumbling like chalk dust. "Since you seem so certain," Whitmore said, his tone dangerously quiet, "by all means, come to the board and prove your assertion. Show the class exactly where you think the error lies." It was a power play, forcing the student to the front like a performer. Most 12-year-olds would crumble under the pressure. But Marcus simply nodded and approached the board with the same quiet confidence he'd shown since day one. "May I erase this section?" Marcus asked politely, gesturing to a corner of the board. "Use the entire board if you need to," Whitmore said with barely concealed sarcasm. "I'm sure we're all eager to learn from your extensive self-study." Marcus began writing, and within seconds, it became clear this was no ordinary student reciting memorized formulas. His approach was elegant, almost artistic. He started with a fundamental theory, building up the equation from first principles. "If we begin with the assumption that our solution must satisfy these boundary conditions," Marcus explained, his voice gaining confidence as he entered his element, "then the coefficient structure must maintain certain properties." The mathematics flowed across the board in neat rows, each step following logically from the last. But it wasn't just the accuracy that stunned the watching students, it was the creativity. Marcus introduced a substitution that Whitmore had never seen before, a clever manipulation that simplified the entire problem. "Where did you learn that substitution?" Sarah Chen burst out, unable to contain herself. "That's brilliant." Marcus paused, chalk in mid-air. I developed it myself. I was working on a similar problem last month and noticed a pattern." "Developed it yourself?"
Bradley Henderson scoffed.
"Right. You probably just copied it from some MIT course online." "Actually," Sarah said, her laptop screen glowing, "I'm searching academic databases right now. That substitution doesn't appear anywhere in the literature. It's new."
The room fell silent again.
Whitmore felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. Not only had the boy spotted his deliberate error, he was introducing novel mathematical techniques, at 12 years old. "Continuing," Marcus said softly, returning to the board. "When we apply this to Professor Whitmore's equation, with the correct positive sign, we get this result." He worked through the solution with mechanical precision, but there was beauty in it too, like watching a concert pianist play scales. When he reached the point where the sign error would cause problems, he carefully demonstrated the contradiction. "Here," he said, circling a term in red chalk, "is where the negative sign creates an impossibility. The series diverges, violating the initial conditions. But with the positive sign." He quickly reworked that section, and the solution fell into place like tumblers in a lock. "We get convergence, and the solution satisfies all boundary conditions." "Furthermore," Marcus added, almost as an afterthought, "if we apply the Laplace transform method instead." He moved to a clean section of board and solved the entire problem again using a completely different approach, arriving at the same answer. Timothy Whitmore III sat frozen in his front row seat, his usual confidence evaporated. He'd been groomed since birth for mathematical excellence, had every advantage money could buy, yet he could barely follow what Marcus was doing. That's graduate-level work," someone whispered. Professor Whitmore stood rigidly by his desk, watching his assumptions shatter with each chalk stroke. The boy wasn't just right about the error, he was demonstrating a level of mathematical sophistication that most PhD candidates would envy. "Mr. Johnson," Whitmore said, his voice strained, "where exactly did you study mathematics?" Marcus set down the chalk and turned to face him.
The Public Librairie on Martin Luther King Boulevard, Sir.
They have Wi-Fi until 9 p.m., and the librarian, Mrs. Rodriguez, would let me stay late if I was quiet. MIT posts their courses online for free.
So do Stanford and Princeton.
YouTube has excellent channels for advanced topics. I learned that mathematics doesn't care where you study it, only that you understand it. The simplicity of the statement cut through Whitmore's defenses like a blade. Here was a child who'd learned graduate mathematics in a public library while Whitmore's own grandson, with every privilege and advantage, struggled with basic proofs. "The equation on the board," Marcus continued quietly. "Did you write it incorrectly on purpose, Professor?"
The question rung in the air like an accusation.
Whitmore felt the eyes of every student upon him. He had a choice: maintain the lie and lose all credibility, or admit to his shameful test. "I may have transcribed it incorrectly," Whitmore said stiffly.
A simple oversight.
Marcus nodded slowly, but his eyes said he knew better. Everyone in the room knew better. The scholarship kid hadn't just solved the problem, he'd exposed the professor's prejudice with mathematical precision.
Should I return to my seat now, sir?
Marcus asked.
Yes, Whitmore managed.
Yes, that would be appropriate. As Marcus walked back to his desk, Sarah Chen started clapping. Just her at first, alone in the silence, but then another student joined, then another. Not everyone. Timothy sat rigid with embarrassment. The Henderson twins looked confused, but enough to make their point. They were applauding Marcus, but Whitmore felt the weight of their judgment on him. He tried to humiliate a brilliant student based on nothing more than prejudice and assumptions. And in doing so, he'd humiliated himself. The bell rang, saving him from further embarrassment. Students gathered their things, buzzing with excitement about what they'd witnessed. As they filed out, Whitmore heard fragments of conversation. "Did you see how he solved that? That substitution was incredible." I can't believe Whitmore tried to say he was wrong. Marcus was among the last to leave, carefully packing his worn notebook. As he passed Whitmore's desk, he paused. "Professor," he said quietly, "your textbook really is excellent. Especially Chapter 12 on Bessel functions. I found 3 typos in the 4th edition, if you're interested for the next printing." Then he was gone, leaving Whitmore alone with his shame and the undeniable proof that covered his blackboard, proof that brilliance could come from anywhere, even a public library on Martin Luther King Boulevard. The professor sank into his chair, staring at the elegant mathematics that a 12-year-old scholarship student had written. For the first time in 37 years, Richard Whitmore wondered if he was the one who had the most to learn. Marcus Johnson's chalk moved across the board with the fluid grace of a conductor's baton, each stroke revealing another layer of mathematical beauty. The advanced substitution technique he developed transformed the complex differential equation into something almost musical in its elegance. "This approach," Marcus explained, his voice steady despite 20 pairs of eyes boring into him, "reduces computational complexity by approximately 40%. I call it the cascade method, because each substitution flows into the next." Professor Whitmore stood frozen by his desk, watching a 12-year-old demonstrate mathematical insight that most professors took decades to develop. The boy wasn't just solving the equation, he was revolutionizing the approach. "Wait," Sarah Chen interrupted, her fingers flying across her laptop keyboard.
Marcus, dis is incredible.
"Have you published this anywhere? This could be a legitimate contribution to the field." Marcus turned from the board, chalk dust on his second-hand uniform. "Published?
No.
I just keep notebooks. Who would publish something from a kid?" "Academic journals don't care about age if the mathematics is sound," Sarah insisted. "Professor Whitmore, isn't that right? You've edited for the Journal of Applied Mathematics." "Yes," Whitmore heard himself say, the words scraping past his throat like sandpaper. The irony wasn't lost on him. He who had judged this boy unworthy based on appearance alone was now being asked to validate his brilliance. Marcus continued his demonstration, unaware of the paradigm shift occurring in the room. He showed 3 different solution methods, each more elegant than the last. When he reached the final approach using Laplace transforms, even the struggling students could follow the logic. "The beauty of mathematics," Marcus said, setting down the chalk, "is that truth doesn't depend on who discovers it. Euler was the son of a pastor. Ramanujan was a clerk.
Mathematical reality exists independent of social reality."
The philosophical depth of the statement from a 12-year-old made several students exchange glances. Timothy Whitmore III slumped in his seat, his usual confidence shattered. He'd been preparing for this class since age 5 with private tutors and summer programs, yet this public school kid understood mathematics at a level Timothy couldn't even aspire to. "Mr. Johnson," Professor Whitmore finally found his voice, "your solution is correct. All 3 methods are correct."
The substitution technique is
He paused, forcing out the words.
innovative.
Possibly groundbreaking.
A murmure ran through the class. Professor Whitmore never gave praise lightly.
His approval was rarer than perfect scores on his notoriously difficult exams. "However," Whitmore continued, grasping for some semblance of authority, "raw talent without proper guidance can lead to bad habits. Mathematics at the highest level requires more than clever tricks." "With respect, Professor," Marcus interrupted gently, "I wouldn't call Ramanujan's work clever tricks, yet he was largely self-taught. Sometimes unconventional paths lead to unexpected discoveries." The reference to Ramanujan, the legendary Indian mathematician who'd revolutionized number theory despite lacking formal training, wasn't lost on anyone. The parallel was obvious, another outsider challenging the establishment with pure genius. Bradley Henderson, desperate to restore some social order, spoke up, "Yeah, but Ramanujan had Hardy at Cambridge to guide him. You can't just learn this stuff from YouTube." "Actually," Marcus said, turning to address Bradley directly, "Professor Terence Tao posts regular problem sets online. Professor Strang from MIT has his entire linear algebra course available for free. The International Mathematical Olympiad publishes all past problems with solutions. The only barrier to learning is curiosity and dedication." He walked back to his seat with quiet dignity, leaving the board covered with mathematics that looked more like art than arithmetic. As he passed Sarah Chen's desk, she whispered, "That was amazing." Professor Whitmore stared at the board, his mind reeling. The cascade method alone was worthy of publication. The elegant proof structure showed deep mathematical maturity. And the boy had done it all while being tested, under pressure, in front of a hostile audience. "Class," Whitmore said slowly, "let's work through Mr. Johnson's solution step by step. Everyone copy this down, including the cascade substitution."
You're witnessing something unusual.
For the remaining 20 minutes, Whitmore found himself in the surreal position of teaching his class using a 12-year-old's method. With each step, his respect grew alongside his shame. The boy hadn't just solved the problem, he'd improved upon centuries of mathematical tradition. When the bell rang, students gathered their materials with unusual quiet. The social dynamics of the class had shifted fundamentally. Marcus Johnson was no longer the charity case, the diversity admit, the kid who didn't belong. He was, undeniably, the best mathematician in the room, possibly including the professor. "Mr. Johnson," Whitmore called as Marcus packed his worn notebook, "please remain after class." The other students filed out, many glancing back curiously. Timothy paused at the door, looking between his grandfather and Marcus with confusion and something like fear. His position as the star student, groomed for greatness, had evaporated in 40 minutes. When they were alone, Whitmore walked slowly to the board, studying Marcus's work. "The cascade method," he said finally. "How long did it take you to develop it?" "About 3 weeks, sir. I was trying to solve a problem from the 1998 Putnam competition and noticed a pattern. One thing led to another." "The Putnam competition is for university students." "Yes, sir. But mathematics doesn't check ID." Despite himself, Whitmore almost smiled. The boy had a point. "Your other notebooks, the ones you mentioned. What else have you been working on?" Marcus hesitated, then reached into his backpack and pulled out 3 composition notebooks, their covers held together with tape. "Various things. Number theory mostly. Some topology. I've been trying to understand the Riemann hypothesis, but that's really hard." Whitmore accepted the notebooks with hands that trembled slightly. The Riemann hypothesis, one of the great unsolved problems in mathematics, with $1 million prize for its solution. And this 12-year-old was attempting it for fun. He opened the first notebook randomly and found pages of dense mathematical exploration. Original proofs, novel approaches to classic problems, questions that showed profound mathematical thinking. It was the kind of work he'd expect from his best graduate students. "Mr. Johnson," Marcus, Whitmore said, the admission feeling like swallowing glass. "I owe you an apology. I made assumptions based on factors that have nothing to do with mathematics. That was wrong of me." Marcus looked up at him with those steady, intelligent eyes. "You wrote the equation wrong on purpose, didn't you? To test me." Whitmore's instinct was to deny it, but something in the boy's gaze demanded honesty. "Yes. I wanted to prove that you didn't belong here. Instead, you've proven that I'm the one who needs to re-examine where I belong." "You belong here, Professor," Marcus said simply. "Your textbook taught me integration. Your papers on Bessel functions opened up entire worlds for me. Good teachers make mistakes too. The important thing is learning from them, right?" The grace of the response from someone so young, someone Whitmore had tried to humiliate, was devastating. Here was a child who'd faced prejudice with dignity, who'd met hostility with excellence, who now offered forgiveness without being asked. "The National Mathematics Olympiad," Whitmore said suddenly. "Pemberton always sends a representative. I traditionally select for my advanced class. Would you be interested?" Marcus's eyes widened, the first genuine childlike response Whitmore had seen from him. "Really? But I've only been here a week." "Mathematics doesn't check enrollment duration either," Whitmore said, echoing the boy's earlier words. "Based on what I've seen today, you're not just qualified, you might be the strongest candidate Pemberton has ever had." "Thank you, sir."
Thank you.
Whitmore handed back the notebooks carefully, as if they were precious manuscripts. "I'll be recommending you for the competition. But Marcus, I need you to understand something. What you did today, developing new techniques, seeing patterns others miss, that's not just talent. That's genius.
Real genius.
And it deserves to be nurtured properly." I'm happy with the library and online courses. No. Whitmore's voice was firm.
You deserve better.
I'm going to make some calls. MIT has a summer program for exceptional young mathematicians. There are mentorship opportunities, research positions. You shouldn't have to learn alone anymore. Marcus clutched his notebooks, his composed mask slipping to reveal the 12-year-old underneath. But those programs, they cost. Leave that to me. Pemberton has resources, and I have influence. Consider it a very small payment on a very large debt. Whitmore paused, then added quietly, the debt owed when someone almost dims a light that could illuminate the mathematical world. As Marcus left the classroom, Professor Whitmore sat at his desk and stared at the elegant mathematics still covering his board. In 37 years of teaching, he'd never been so wrong about a student. The scholarship boy he'd tried to embarrass had instead taught him the most important lesson of his career. Brilliance has no color, no pedigree, no zip code. It only needs recognition and opportunity to flourish. And Richard Whitmore would make sure Marcus Johnson. Professor Whitmore's office hadn't felt this small in decades. He sat behind his mahogany desk, Marcus Johnson's student file spread before him like evidence in a case he'd already prejudged incorrectly. The afternoon sun slanted through tall windows, illuminating dust motes that danced like the thoughts swirling through his mind. 3 phone calls had shattered his remaining assumptions. The first was to Dr. Jennifer Martinez at Martin Luther King Elementary.
Marcus Johnson?
Oh, Professor, that boy is extraordinary. We didn't know what to do with him. By 3rd grade, he was correcting errors in the math textbooks. We had no resources for a child like that. The second was to the Pemberton admissions office. Director Harold Fleming's voice carried awe. His entrance exam?
Perfect score.
First one in Pemberton's history. We actually had him retake it, thinking there'd been a mistake. He scored perfect again and solved the bonus problem using a method our exam writers hadn't even considered. But it was the 3rd call that left Whitmore staring at his bookshelf of achievements, feeling hollow.
Professor Whitmore?
This is Dr. Angela Chun from MIT's Young Scholars Program. I'm returning your call about Marcus Johnson. How do you know that name? We've been trying to contact him for 2 years. Whitmore had gripped the phone tighter. 2 years. He submitted a paper to our undergraduate mathematics journal when he was 10. On novel applications of modular forms. We thought it was a hoax until we verified the mathematics. We offered him a full scholarship to our summer program, but he never responded. The address was a homeless shelter.
Homeless shelter.
The words echoed in Whitmore's mind as he opened Marcus's financial aid application. Single mother, Diane Johnson, occupation, registered nurse. 3 different addresses in 5 years. Income that barely covered basic necessities. A knock interrupted his spiraling thoughts.
Come in.
Dr. Samuel Chun, the young mathematics teacher, entered carrying a stack of papers. You asked to see me, Professor?
Sit.
Whitmore gestured to the leather chair across from his desk. You teach the intermediate mathematics class. Marcus Johnson was your student last week before I had him moved to advanced. Tell me about him.
Jeunesse facile up.
Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. But more than that, kind. I caught him tutoring 3 struggling students during lunch. He'd created these visual explanations that made complex concepts accessible. He wasn't doing it for extra credit or recognition. The other students didn't even know he was helping them catch up. Tutoring. Whitmore felt another assumption crumble. For free. He said math was beautiful and everyone deserved to see its beauty. Professor, I tried to advocate for him to start an advanced placement, but I was told. Chin hesitated. You were told what? That scholarship students needed to prove themselves first. That we couldn't lower standards just for diversity. The words hung between them, accusations in their simplicity. Whitmore had been part of that decision, had nodded along with the policy that nearly kept a generational talent in remedial classes. There's more, Chin continued, pulling out a manila folder. After you had me collect his work from last week, I noticed something. These problems he was working on during free time? They're from your 1987 paper on elliptic curves. Whitmore accepted the papers with numb fingers. His own work, reimagined through the eyes of a 12-year-old. But Marcus hadn't just solved the problems. He'd found an error in Whitmore's original proof. A small one, insignificant to the conclusion, but an error nonetheless. He was too polite to mention it, Chen said softly. But he fixed it in his work. Look at equation 3.7.
37 years.
The paper had been cited hundreds of times, reviewed by the best mathematical minds in the world. And a 12-year-old had spotted what everyone else missed. Leave the papers, Whitmore said quietly, and send Timothy to see me. His grandson arrived 20 minutes later, designer backpack slung over one shoulder, confidence worn like expensive cologne. You wanted to see me, grandfather?
Sit down, Timothy. Tell me about Marcus Johnson. Timothy S. face darkened. The scholarship kid?
He's a show-off. Probably memorized a bunch of stuff to look smart. Dad says diversity admits water down.
Stop. Whitmore's voice cut like ice.
Your father says what I taught him to say, what my father taught me. And we were all wrong.
Timothy blinked, confused.
Wrong about what? Whitmore turned his computer screen toward his grandson. This is Marcus Johnson's solution to the Putnam competition problem from 1998. You couldn't solve the practice problem from 2015. This is his original proof for a theorem that graduate students struggle with. You struggle with basic applications. That's not fair. He probably had help. From whom? His mother works double shifts as a nurse. They've lived in 3 different apartments in 5 years. He learned this in public libraries, Timothy. While you had every advantage money could buy, he had nothing but curiosity and determination. Timothy's face flushed red. So what? Am I supposed to feel bad because some kid? You're supposed to learn, Whitmore interrupted. What makes someone exceptional isn't their last name or their zip code.
It's un G for knowledge.
Drive.
Brilliance.
Things that can't be bought or inherited. He pulled out a faded photograph from his desk drawer, himself at Cambridge, young and hungry, surrounded by British aristocrats who'd looked at him the same way he'd looked at Marcus. I forgot, he said, more to himself than Timothy. I forgot what it was like to be the outsider, to have to prove yourself twice as hard for half the recognition. I became the very thing I once fought against. Timothy shifted uncomfortably. So what am I supposed to do? Pretend I'm not good at math. You're very good at math, Timothy. Good enough for any university in the country. But Marcus Johnson is extraordinary. And that's okay. Excellence isn't diminished by the existence of genius. But prejudice diminishes us all. After Timothy left, Whitmore sat alone as shadows lengthened across his office. He pulled out Marcus's notebooks again, reading through the careful proofs, the creative leaps, the questions that pushed to the boundaries of known mathematics. On the last page of the 3rd notebook, he found something that made his throat tighten. A problem Marcus had titled For My Mom, a practical application of optimization theory to create the most efficient work schedule for a nurse working multiple shifts while maximizing time with family. The beauty of it, the love encoded in mathematical symbols, the genius applied to such a humble problem, it was devastating. Whitmore picked up his phone and dialed one more number.
Principale, this is Richard Whitmore.
About the National Mathematics Olympiad selection. I have a recommendation that might surprise you. As he spoke, his eyes remained on the notebook, on the mathematics created by a boy who learned in libraries and lived in uncertainty but saw beauty in numbers that transcended every barrier society tried to erect. The investigation was complete. The evidence was overwhelming. Marcus Johnson wasn't just a good student who deserved a chance. He was a once-in-a-generation mathematical mind who had already overcome more obstacles than most people faced in a lifetime. And Richard Whitmore had almost been another obstacle. Never again, he promised himself. Never again would he let prejudice blind him to brilliance. The cost was too high, not just for students like Marcus, but for mathematics itself. Because somewhere in a public library, another child might be discovering the beauty of numbers. And they deserved better than a world that would judge them by anything other than the contents of their mind. Monday morning assembly at Pemberton Academy carried the weight of tradition. 800 students in pressed uniforms filled the auditorium's oak pews, while portraits of distinguished alumni gazed down from paneled walls. The space smelled of old wood and privilege, carrying whispers of decades of achievement.
Principal Eleanor stood at the podium, her silver hair catching the light from stained glass windows.
Behind her sat the department heads, including Professor Whitmore, whose presence at assembly was rare enough to generate whispers among the students. "Before we begin today's announcements," Principal Hayes said, her voice carrying easily through the vaulted space, "I want to address something that makes Pemberton Academy exceptional. It's not our buildings, though they're beautiful. It's not our history, though it's distinguished. It's our commitment to recognizing and nurturing brilliance wherever we find it." In the middle section, Marcus Johnson sat between two students who still treated him like a curiosity, something exotic and temporary. His second-hand uniform had been washed so many times the crest was barely visible, but his posture was straight, his attention focused. "The National Mathematics Olympiad," Hayes continued, "represents the pinnacle of pre-collegiate mathematical achievement. For 43 years, Pemberton Academy has sent a representative. Many have placed well. Some have won. All have represented the excellence we strive for." Timothy Whitmore III sat in the front row with the other legacy students, his jaw tight. He'd been preparing for this announcement since 5th grade, when his grandfather first mentioned the Olympiad. It was supposed to be his birthright, his moment to add another trophy to the Whitmore family collection. "The selection process is rigorous," Hayes explained. "It requires not just mathematical ability, but creativity, insight, and the capacity to see patterns where others see chaos. This year's selection has been unusual." Professor Whitmore rose and joined Hayes at the podium. The auditorium fell completely silent. Whitmore's assembly appearances were legendary for their rarity and impact. "Mathematics," Whitmore began, his voice carrying the authority of decades, "is the most democratic of disciplines. It cares nothing for your name, your background, or your circumstances. It cares only for truth, elegantly expressed and rigorously proven." Several teachers exchanged glances. This wasn't Whitmore's usual speech about standards and tradition. "Last week," he continued, "I witnessed something remarkable. A student in my advanced class demonstrated not just competence, not just excellence, but genuine mathematical innovation. This student developed a novel approach to differential equations that I'll be submitting for publication in the Journal of Applied Mathematics." Gasps rippled through the audience. Student work published in academic journals was virtually unheard of at the high school level. However, Whitmore's voice hardened slightly, "I also witnessed something shameful.
Préjudice disguised à standard.
Assumptions based on appearance rather than ability."
From myself.
The auditorium was so quiet that the distant sound of traffic could be heard through the thick walls. Timothy's face had gone pale, his hands clenched in his lap. "The student I'm speaking of came to Pemberton on a full scholarship. He learned advanced mathematics not in expensive summer programs or with private tutors, but in public libraries, using free online resources, driven by pure love of the subject. He represents everything education should aspire to, the democratic ideal that brilliance can emerge from anywhere if given opportunity." Marcus felt hundreds of eyes turning toward him. Sarah Chun, sitting 2 rows ahead, turned and gave him an encouraging smile. The Henderson twins looked stunned. Jason Miller, who'd mocked him that first day, seemed to be reconsidering everything. "It is my privilege," Whitmore said, his voice carrying unusual emotion, "to announce that Pemberton Academy's representative to the National Mathematics Olympiad will be Marcus Johnson." The announcement landed like a thunderclap. Some students began clapping immediately, Sarah Chen leading the charge, followed by Dr. Chen and other younger faculty. Others sat frozen, processing the upset of established order. Timothy Whitmore III remained perfectly still, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. 43 years of Whitmore family tradition ended. The torch he'd been groomed to carry passed to a scholarship student who'd been at Pemberton less than 2 weeks. "Mr. Johnson," Principal Hayes said warmly, "would you please stand?" Marcus rose slowly, aware of every eye in the auditorium. His mother's words echoed in his mind, "Stand tall, baby.
You earned everything you've got." The applause grew, spreading through the auditorium in wave.
Not everyone joined. Some sat with arms crossed, clinging to old prejudices, but the majority recognized they were witnessing something special. Additionally, Whitmore continued as the applause died down, I'm establishing a new program. The Marcus Johnson Mathematics Initiative will provide resources for talented students regardless of economic background. It will fund access to advanced materials, competition fees, and mentorship opportunities. Because brilliance shouldn't be limited by circumstance. Marcus felt his knees weaken. A program named after him? He was 12 years old, had been at this school less than 2 weeks, and now his name would be attached to an initiative that could help other kids like him? The selection committee's decision was unanimous, Hayes added, which wasn't entirely true. There had been resistance from some old guard board members until Whitmore threatened to resign. We believe Marcus will not just represent Pemberton well, but has the potential to achieve something no Pemberton student has managed in 4 decades, winning the international competition. As Marcus sat back down, students around him offered congratulations with varying degrees of sincerity. Some seemed genuinely excited, others confused by the disruption of social order. A few looked at him with new respect, as if seeing him clearly for the first time. One more announcement, Whitmore said. The Olympiad training will be intensive. 6 hours daily, including weekends. It requires total commitment. Mr. Johnson, are you prepared for this?
Marcus stood again.
Yes, sir. I've been preparing my whole life. Good. Training begins today after school.
Don't be late.
As the assembly dispersed, Timothy finally moved, intercepting his grandfather near the stage. How could you? He hissed, voice low but furious. 43 years of family tradition. 43 years of choosing good over best, Whitmore replied quietly. You're talented, Timothy. Very talented. But Marcus is extraordinary. And if you can't see the difference, then I failed to teach you the most important lesson, that excellence stands alone, regardless of its source. Across the auditorium, Marcus was surrounded by a small group of students. Sarah Chun was already discussing training strategies. Dr. Chun was offering additional support. Even some previously hostile faces showed grudging respect. But Marcus's eyes found Professor Whitmore across the crowd. The professor nodded once, an acknowledgement, an apology, and a promise all in one gesture. The National Mathematics Olympiad would test Marcus's abilities against the best young mathematical minds in the country. But in many ways, the hardest test had already been passed. He'd proven that brilliance could emerge from public libraries and subsidized lunches, that talent could flourish despite prejudice, that mathematics truly was democratic. Now came the work of proving it on a national stage. And Marcus Johnson, the boy who'd learned calculus by candlelight when the electricity was cut off, was ready. The competition had been announced. The real work was about to begin. The Johnson apartment sat on the 4th floor of a building where the elevator worked sporadically and the hallway lights flickered like dying stars. But inside Unit 4B, a different kind of light burned bright. The desk lamp Marcus had bought at a thrift store, illuminating pages covered with mathematical symbols that danced like poetry across recycled paper. It was 10:47 p.m., and Diane Johnson was still at the hospital, working her second double shift this week. Marcus had made himself dinner, pasta with butter again, and settled into his evening routine, 3 hours of Olympiad preparation after completing his regular homework in 45 minutes. The apartment was small enough that he could see everything from his desk, the kitchen where his mother had taught him fractions using measuring cups, the couch where they'd cuddle and watch Khan Academy videos together when he was younger, the wall where she taped his first perfect math test with a note, "My brilliant boy." Marcus worked through problem sets he downloaded from the International Mathematical Olympiad archives. His solutions sprawled across notebooks bought at dollar stores, each page precious, each proof a small victory against circumstance. A soft knock interrupted his concentration.
Tout soft for selon l'or, tout laid for nébor.
Marcus opened the door to find his mother, still in her scrubs, holding a small box. "Mom? I thought you had until midnight." "Traded shifts with Patricia," Diane said, entering and setting down the box. "Couldn't miss this day. My baby got selected for the national competition." She pulled him into a hug that smelled of hospital disinfectant and exhaustion and love. Marcus felt tears prick his eyes but blinked them back. His mother had enough to worry about without adding his emotions to the list. "I brought something," she said, opening the box to reveal a graphing calculator, not new, but a high-end model. Found it at the pawn shop. The owner said it works perfectly, just has some scratches. Mom, we can't afford. Hush. You're going to the Olympics. Olympiad, Marcus corrected gently. And you're going to have the right tools. Even if I have to work extra shifts. Marcus turned the calculator over in his hands, throat tight. He knew exactly how many hours of work this represented, how many meals his mother would skip to make the budget balance. Thank you, he whispered. Now show me what you're working on, Diane said, settling beside him at the desk despite her obvious fatigue. Explain it like I'm 5. Marcus smiled, their old game. He'd been explaining mathematics to his mother since he was 7, and she always listened with genuine interest even when the concepts flew far above her head. This is a problem about graph theory, he began, sketching nodes and edges. Imagine you're trying to visit all the hospitals in the city, but you want to find the shortest route. As he explained, transforming abstract mathematics into stories his mother could follow, Diane watched her son with pride that bordered on pain. She saw what others missed, the price of his brilliance.
The isolation at school before Pemberton.
The hours spent alone while she worked. The childhood sacrificed on the altar of survival and excellence. Marcus, she said suddenly, are you happy? He paused mid-explanation. What do you mean? This new school. The competition. All of it. Baby, I want to make sure you're doing this for you, not because you think you have to succeed for us. Marcus set down his pencil and really looked at his mother. 34 years old, but the double shifts had aged her. Beautiful still, but tired in ways that went beyond physical exhaustion. She'd given up her own dreams of becoming a doctor to raise him alone after his father left before he was born. Mom, he said carefully, when I solve a really hard problem, when the pattern suddenly makes sense and everything clicks into place, it's the best feeling in the world.
Better than anything.
It's like music, but only I can hear it.
Diane says misted.
Your father used to talk about music that way. Before he chose drugs over us. They rarely discussed his father, a jazz musician whose genius had been consumed by addiction. Marcus knew he'd inherited his mathematical mind from somewhere, just as he'd inherited his mother's determination. I'm not him, Marcus said firmly. Mathematics doesn't destroy people. It builds them.
I know, baby.
I know. She squeezed his hand.
Show me another problem.
They worked until nearly midnight, Marcus explaining, Diane asking questions that showed she understood more than she let on. When her eyes started drooping, Marcus insisted she go to bed. Big day tomorrow, she murmured, kissing his forehead. First day of Olympiad training. After she went to her room, Marcus returned to his desk. The calculator sat beside his notebooks, a tangible reminder of sacrifices made for his dreams. He picked up his pencil and dove back into the problems, but now they carried extra weight. He wasn't just preparing for a competition. He was preparing to justify every extra shift his mother worked, every meal she skipped, every dream she deferred. The scholarship to Pemberton had opened a door, but walking through it meant carrying the hopes of everyone who'd believed in him when the world saw just another poor black kid. At 2 a.m., he finally closed his notebooks. 6 hours until school, then training with Professor Whitmore. He should sleep, but his mind buzzed with theorems and possibilities. He pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and began writing. Dear Mom. By the time you read this, I'll be at school. I wanted to say thank you, but not just for the calculator. Thank you for believing in my dreams when they seemed impossible. Thank you for working doubles so I could have internet access. Thank you for never making me feel like a burden, even when I know how hard it's been. I'm going to win this competition. Not just for me, but for you. For every night you came home exhausted but still asked about my day.
For every time you said my brilliant boy, when the world made me feel small.
You gave up your dreams so I could have mine. I promise I won't waste that gift.
All my love. Marcus. PS there's leftover pasta in the fridge. Please eat breakfast before your shift.
He left the note on the kitchen counter where she'd find it, then returned to his desk for one last problem. Outside, the city slept, but in apartment 4B, brilliance burned bright against the darkness, fueled by love and sacrifice and the unshakable belief that numbers could lift a boy from poverty to possibility. The hidden practice continued, as it had for years, as it would until Marcus proved that zip codes and bank accounts had nothing to do with the elegant truth of mathematics. Every equation solved was a step toward a future where his mother could rest, where their lights would never flicker, where dreams weren't limited by circumstance. The calculator caught the lamplight, scratched but functional, like everything in their lives. Perfect in its imperfection, powerful despite its flaws. Just like Marcus Johnson himself. Professor Whitmore stood at the front of Pemberton Academy's smallest classroom, watching 6 students work through what he privately called the destroyer, a problem set so challenging it had reduced PhD candidates to tears. 5 students hunched over their desks, faces twisted in concentration or confusion. The 6th sat calmly in the center, pencil moving in smooth, confident strokes. Marcus Johnson was doing something Whitmore had never seen before. He was enjoying himself. 2 weeks of intensive training had transformed the dynamics completely. Timothy Whitmore III, initially resentful, had gradually developed grudging respect as Marcus patiently explained concepts during breaks. Sarah Chun pushed herself harder, inspired by Marcus's dedication. Even the Henderson twins, selected as alternates, had stopped their snide comments after Marcus helped them understand non-Euclidean geometry. But today was different. Today, Whitmore would make the final decision about who would represent Pemberton at nationals. "Time," Whitmore announced. "Pencils down." 5 pencils clattered to desks. Marcus finished his final stroke, set his pencil down gently, and looked up with that same calm intensity that had unnerved Whitmore from day one.
Pass your papers forward.
As Whitmore collected the solutions, he noticed the varying degrees of completion. Timothy had managed 3 of the 5 problems. Sarah had attempted all 5, but with questionable accuracy. The Hendersons looked defeated. Marcus had not only completed all 5 problems, but had included alternative solutions for 3 of them. "While I review these," Whitmore said, "please work on the supplementary problem on the board." He turned and wrote out a new equation, this one from his own research, a problem he'd been struggling with for 6 months. It was unfair, really, to give high school students something that challenged professional mathematicians. But he was curious. The students stared at the board with expressions ranging from confusion to despair. Sarah whispered, "This isn't even in the same notation system we've been using. Is this even solvable?"
Bradley Henderson muttered.
Marcus studied the board for 30 seconds, then raised his hand. "Professor, may I approach the board?" "If you wish to attempt it, Mr. Johnson." Marcus walked forward, picked up the chalk, and began writing. But instead of diving into calculations, he first transformed the notation, revealing the problem's underlying structure. It was like watching someone translate hieroglyphics in real time.
"Oh," Sarah breathed.
"It's actually a disguised version of the Riemann-Roch theorem," Marcus said quietly, continuing to write. But with an interesting twist in the 3rd component. Whitmore felt his pulse quicken. He'd been thinking about this problem in isolation, but Marcus had immediately recognized its connection to algebraic geometry. The boy wasn't just solving it, he was seeing it in ways Whitmore hadn't. 20 minutes later, Marcus stepped back. The board was covered with elegant mathematics that bridged 3 different fields of study. He'd not only solved Whitmore's research problem but had identified why it had been so difficult, a subtle assumption in the initial formulation that created unnecessary complexity. The key, Marcus explained to his stunned audience, is recognizing that the boundary conditions can be redefined using this transformation. Then it becomes almost trivial.
Trivial.
Whitmore's 6-month struggle reduced to almost trivial by a 12-year-old.
How?
Timothy burst out, forgetting his usual reserve. "How do you see these connections?" Marcus considered the question seriously.
"I don't know."
Patterns just appear. Like when you're listening to music and suddenly you hear how all the instruments work together. Mathematics has a rhythm, a flow. You just have to learn to hear it. Whitmore set down the other tests without looking at them. The decision was already made, had been made really, from that first day when Marcus corrected his deliberate error. "Class dismissed," he said quietly.
"Except you, Monsieur Johnson."
The others filed out slowly, Sarah patting Marcus on the shoulder, Timothy pausing as if to say something before thinking better of it. When they were alone, Whitmore sat on the edge of his desk, abandoning his usual formal posture. "The problem you just solved," he said. "I've been working on it for 6 months."
Marcus's eyes widened.
"I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." "Don't apologize. Never apologize for brilliance." Whitmore pulled out a folder from his desk. "I need to tell you something about the National Mathematics Olympiad. In 43 years, Pemberton has never won. We've placed well, had honorable mentions, but never won." "I'll do my best, sir."
No.
Whitmore's voice was firm. "You'll do what you just did. You'll see patterns others miss. You'll find elegant solutions to ugly problems. You'll represent not just Pemberton, but every student who's been told they don't belong." He opened the folder, revealing letters from MIT, Harvard, Princeton, all expressing interest in Marcus based on Whitmore's recommendations. "Win or lose at nationals," Whitmore continued, "your future is secure. These institutions recognize what I was almost too blind to see, that minds like yours appear once in a generation." Marcus stared at the letters, hands trembling slightly. "My mom. She won't have to work double shifts anymore?"
The question broke Whitmore sat.
While his grandson worried about which Mercedes to get for his 16th birthday, Marcus worried about his mother's exhaustion. "Full scholarships," Whitmore confirmed. "Living expenses included. Some are even offering stipends for family support." Tears finally escaped Marcus's careful control. He wiped them away quickly, embarrassed. "There's no shame in crying," Whitmore said gently.
He cried when he got into Cambridge.
"Cried harder when I realized I'd almost prevented another boy from having his Cambridge moment." "You gave me a chance," Marcus said. "Even after everything. You could have chosen Timothy or Sarah." "No," Whitmore disagreed.
Mathematics shows you.
"I just finally listened to what the numbers were saying." He pulled out one more item, a first edition of Gauss's Disquisitions Arithmeticae, worth more than Marcus's family made in a year. "This was given to me by my mentor when I was chosen for my first competition," Whitmore said.
It's your now. Marcus accepted the book like a holy relic. He can't. This is too valuable. Knowledge is the only true value, Whitmore interrupted.
"Everything else is just paper and time. That book has been waiting 40 years for the right student. It was waiting for you." As Marcus clutched the book, Whitmore saw not the scholarship kid he tried to embarrass, but the future of mathematics itself. Brilliant, unexpected, revolutionary. "The competition is in 3 weeks," Whitmore said. "We'll train every day. I'll teach you everything I know, though frankly, you're already teaching me. Together, we'll show the mathematical world what Pemberton Academy, what Marcus Johnson, is capable of." Marcus nodded, then surprised them both by stepping forward and hugging the old professor. Whitmore stiffened for a moment, then returned the embrace, feeling the weight of his own transformation. When they separated, both pretended not to notice the other's wet eyes. "Now," Whitmore said, voice gruff with emotion, "let's discuss your solution to my research problem. I think with some refinement, we have another publishable paper. The Whitmore-Johnson theorem has a nice ring to it, don't you think?" Marcus's smile could have powered the entire academy. "Johnson-Whitmore sounds better alphabetically, sir." Whitmore actually laughed, a sound so rare his colleagues would have been shocked. "Cheeky. I like it. Very well, Johnson-Whitmore it is." As they turned to the board to refine the proof, two mathematicians separated by age and background but united by their love of truth, the late afternoon sun streamed through the windows, transforming chalk dust into gold. The final test had been passed. Not just by Marcus, but by Richard Whitmore himself. And the real journey was just beginning. The auditorium of the Washington Convention Center buzzed with nervous energy as 300 of America's brightest young mathematical minds took their seats for the National Mathematics Olympiad. Marcus Johnson sat in row M, seat 13, a prime number, which he took as a good sign. His Pemberton Academy blazer was new, purchased by the school specifically for this event, and it felt strange against his shoulders. 6 weeks had passed since Professor Whitmore announced Marcus as Pemberton's representative. 6 weeks of intensive training, of problems that pushed the boundaries of pre-collegiate mathematics, of a relationship that had transformed from antagonism to something approaching father and son. Whitmore sat in the observer section, fingers drumming nervously against his program. Beside him, Principal Hayes and Dr. Chun flanked a small woman in scrubs who'd taken a rare day off, Diane Johnson, her eyes never leaving her son. "Welcome to the 44th National Mathematics Olympiad," the announcer's voice boomed. "Today, these exceptional students will face 5 problems over 4.5 hours. These problems require not just knowledge, but creativity, insight, and mathematical maturity far beyond their years." Marcus closed his eyes, hearing Professor Whitmore's final advice: don't solve the problems. Dance with them. Let them show you their secrets.
You may begin.
300 papers rustled in unison. Marcus read through all 5 problems first, his trained eye categorizing, analyzing, searching for patterns. Problem 3 made him smile. It was related to the cascade method he developed. Problem 5 made him pause. It was beautiful in its complexity, the kind of problem that separated good from extraordinary. He began with problem 1, his pencil moving with practiced precision. Around him, students scribbled, erased, started over. Marcus wrote steadily, seeing not just the solution but the elegance within it. He included a proof using standard methods, then added his own approach, shorter, cleaner, unexpected. In the observer section, Whitmore watched his protégé work. Even from a distance, he could see the calm confidence in Marcus's movements. No frantic energy, no desperate searching, just the steady progress of someone who understood mathematics at a fundamental level. "Is that your student?" a professor from Harvard whispered to Whitmore. "The one who published the Johnson-Whitmore theorem?" "That's him," Whitmore confirmed, pride evident in his voice.
12 years old, the Harvard professor mused. Incroyable.
By the 90-minute mark, Marcus had completed 3 problems. He paused, stretched discreetly, and noticed other students struggling with problem 2. Timothy Whitmore III, competing for his prep school in Connecticut, was 3 rows ahead, clearly frustrated.
Fort à moment, Marcus felt sympathie.
He knew the weight of expectations Timothy carried. Problem 4 required number theory, but with a twist that connected to topology. Marcus smiled, remembering a late-night session with Professor Whitmore where they'd explored exactly such connections. He began writing, creating a bridge between 2 mathematical worlds that most students saw as separate. It was problem 5 that would become legendary in Olympiad history. Prove or disprove, every sufficiently large even integer can be expressed as the sum of 2 primes and a perfect square. The problem touched on the Goldbach conjecture, one of mathematics' great unsolved mysteries. It was cruel, really, to give high school students a problem that had stumped professionals for centuries. Most students would attempt a few special cases and hope for partial credit. Marcus stared at it for 5 full minutes, his mind racing through everything he'd learned, not just from Whitmore, but from those long nights in the public library, from YouTube lectures, from scribbled notes on recycled paper. Then, like sunrise breaking through clouds, he saw it. He couldn't prove it completely, nobody could. But he could do something else. He could prove why it was true for an infinite class of numbers using a novel approach that combined additive number theory with geometric insights. It wasn't a full proof, but it was a significant step forward. His pencil flew across the paper, building an architecture of logic that would later be described by the grading committee as graduate-level insight presented with undergraduate clarity and high school enthusiasm. Time. Marcus set down his pencil, hand cramping slightly. Around him, students looked exhausted, defeated, or cautiously optimistic. He felt empty. Not bad empty, but the kind of empty that comes after pouring everything you have onto a page. The wait for results was agony. Students clustered in nervous groups, comparing approaches, realizing mistakes. Marcus found himself surrounded by curious competitors who'd heard about the 12-year-old phenomenon. "How did you approach problem 5? Asked a girl from Stuyvesant High School. "I couldn't prove the whole thing," Marcus admitted. "But I found a pattern using quadratic residues that works for about 70% of cases." Several students stared at him. "Quadratic residues? We haven't even." "The beauty of mathematics," Marcus said, echoing something Whitmore had taught him, "is that the tools don't care how old you are when you learn them." 3 hours later, they gathered for results. The announcer began with honorable mentions, working upward. Timothy Whitmore III received an honorable mention, a respectable showing that would guarantee college admissions but felt like failure to someone raised for greatness. Bronze medals. Silver medals. Marcus's name hadn't been called. In the audience, Diane Johnson gripped Principal Hayes's hand so tightly her knuckles went white. And now, the gold medal winners. In third place. Not Marcus. In second place.
Sti not Marcus.
Professor Whitmore felt his heart sink. Had they pushed too hard? Expected too much? And this year's National Mathematics Olympiad champion, with a perfect score, the first in Olympiad history, Marcus Johnson from Pemberton Academy. The auditorium erupted. Diane Johnson burst into tears, burying her face in Principal Hayes's shoulder. Dr. Chun was on his feet, applauding wildly. And Professor Richard Whitmore, who hadn't cried since his wife's funeral 15 years ago, felt tears streaming down his face.
Marcus Woked tout the stage inadaz. Perfect score.
First in history. The words felt surreal. As he accepted the gold medal and scholarship offers that would transform his family's life, his eyes found Professor Whitmore in the crowd. The old mathematician was standing, applauding, tears unashamed on his weathered face. When their eyes met, Whitmore mouthed 3 words, "I was wrong." Marcus shook his head slightly and mouthed back, "We were both right." The ceremony continued with speeches about excellence and achievement, but Marcus's mind was elsewhere. He thought about his mother's sacrifices, about long nights in the library, about a professor who'd overcome his own prejudices to become a true mentor. Later, at the reception, Whitmore found Marcus standing alone on a balcony, looking out over Washington, D.C. Overwhelming. Whitmore asked. "A little," Marcus admitted. "Professor, what you said about being wrong." "I was wrong," Whitmore interrupted. "Wrong to judge you by your circumstances. Wrong to assume brilliance came with a pedigree. Wrong about so many things I'd believed for decades." "But you changed," Marcus pointed out. "You saw past your assumptions. That's harder than any math problem." Whitmore smiled sadly. "You taught an old professor the most important lesson of his career, that greatness can come from anywhere. That boy in the second-hand uniform, working in a public library? He just achieved something no privileged student in Olympiad history has managed." "We achieved it," Marcus corrected. "I couldn't have done this without your training, your belief, your transformation."
The Johnson-Whitmore Theorem, Roman B.
Johnson-Whitmore, the professor agreed, then pulled out an envelope. "Speaking of which, the journal accepted our paper. You're published, Marcus. 12 years old and already contributing to mathematical knowledge." They stood in comfortable silence, mentor and student, each transformed by the other. Inside, Diane Johnson was being interviewed, tears still fresh as she spoke about her brilliant son. The Henderson twins were taking photos with Marcus's medal. Even Timothy had approached to offer genuine congratulations, his worldview shifted by Marcus's grace and genius. "What now?" Marcus asked. "Now," Whitmore considered. "Now you prepare for the International Mathematical Olympiad. MIT wants you for their summer program. Princeton is offering early admission. The world is opening doors that were closed to you 6 weeks ago."
And Pemberton. Pemberton will never be the same.
The Marcus Johnson Mathematics Initiative has already received funding to sponsor 10 new scholarship students next year. Your success has shown everyone what we've been missing by limiting our search for brilliance. Marcus smiled, thinking of other kids in public libraries, working by lamplight, dreaming impossible dreams. Good. Mathematics is too beautiful to be hoarded by the few. As they returned to the reception, Professor Whitmore reflected on his transformation. 6 weeks ago, he tried to humiliate a brilliant child based on prejudice and assumptions. Today, that same child had achieved mathematical immortality, and in doing so, had saved Whitmore's soul. The professor had spent 40 years building walls around excellence, defining who belonged and who didn't. Marcus Johnson had solved that equation too, proving that brilliance recognized no boundaries, that genius could bloom in the most unexpected soil. The transformation was complete. Dear friend, this story reminds us that brilliance exists everywhere, in public libraries and housing projects, in struggling families and overlooked communities. Too often, We let prejudice and assumptions blind us to the extraordinary potential that surrounds us. Marcus Johnson's journey from a public school student to a national champion isn't just about mathematics. It's about recognizing that talent has no zip code, genius has no color, and determination can overcome any obstacle. Every child deserves the chance to discover their gifts, whether in mathematics, music, art, or any field where passion meets purpose. When we open doors based on merit rather than privilege, when we look beyond surface circumstances to see the light within, we don't just change individual lives, we transform our entire society. If this story touched your heart, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. Share it with someone who needs to be reminded that their dreams are valid, no matter where they come from. Together, we can create a world where every Marcus Johnson gets their chance to shine. Remember, excellence isn't about where you start, it's about having the courage to begin and the determination to persevere. Thank you for watching, and never stop believing in the power of potential.